Hello, I'm putting together a short video that is related to your data sets assignment that you're working on this week. Hopefully you'll find this helpful and will hopefully simplify the process a bit. If it doesn't, please feel free to reach out to me and maybe we could be meeting about it as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some examples from an action research that I actually did. I'm going to share my screen, see if I can get it here. It's not what I wanted. So what I'm going to be sharing is based on some action research that I did, probably about 7 or 8 years ago when I was early on when I was teaching a social studies pedagogy class. And in the class, I wanted to find out if my students who were also doing student teaching were using activities, were using pedagogy, resources that I was teaching them in the classroom. So I want to see if it was working so I could see how to revise my course in upcoming years. So what I did is I just had the simple research question, kind of like the question I asked you all to come up with. How are students using what they learned in my social studies methods class? So based on my research question, that really drove the data sets that I was going to use when I was researching this. So based on that research question, I chose to do the following data sets. I did surveys with my students. I did interviews with my students. I analyzed student lesson plans, and I did some selected observations with students. Some of my students who said they were going to be using some strategies or lessons that we actually did in the classroom. I went in and did observations with them to see how they were adapting those, if they were truly using them the same way I did them, and how they were using them. So what I'm going to share with you is I'm going to share with you some of what I did with some of the interviews, and I'll be kind of talking about the surveys with that. Basically, so the research question drove the data sets that I want to use. And then that research question I'm looking at, how are students using what they learned in my social studies methods class, that really drove the types of interview and survey questions that I chose to use. And I'm going to give you some examples of the interview questions for this particular one. For the interview questions, so the research question, as I just said, drove the types of questions that I chose to ask. Additionally, since some of my questions were based on results from the survey that I gave to them prior to doing the interview, um, I wanted the freedom to delve deeper, so I used what's called a semi-structured interview. And in semi-structured interviews, you'll have some set interview questions that you come in and you can see the four that I had in there. And then based on how the answers that I'm getting, I'll ask some additional questions so I can go more in depth on what they're saying. Or I may find, in some cases, their answers led to some interesting unanticipated consequences that I wanted to ask some follow-up questions about as well. So those are the four set questions I had. But again, with semi-structured interviews, you'll have some other questions that you might just pop up as well. So I would give these four questions to each of the students that I was interviewing, but I let them know that there might be some other questions that could come out of this as well. So with that, that's what you would be doing with your data sets. I mean, if your interviews, I would recommend coming up with 4, 5, 6 questions. I like the semi-structured interviews, like I said. With a survey, I would, depending again on what you're exploring. With mine, I asked them, I think it was 12 questions, and they were specifically related to strategies we learned in class, to different types of pedagogy that we've learned in class, like simple questions like, do you use inquiry in your lessons? Do you use primary source analysis in your questions? So they were very simple. Um, and then some specific examples of things that we did in the class I was asking, were you using that in the class as well? So with that, what you are going to do, I am going to stop sharing that. And actually, I'm going to go to another area to share. I want to go into under assignments in the assignments module in your class. You'll find the design of data sources and data collection. And these are gives you the directions for what you are doing this week and next week on the three different types of data sources you're doing, two this week and one the following week. Let's see if it comes up. Okay, so just walk through this again. You will be expected to design, collect, and analyze various data sources as part of course assignment. We will look at multiple methods of collection. You will complete a minimum of 3 data sources and collection. Remember, I reduced that down to 3 from what it was before. One must be an interview where you're going to interview 4 different people. It does not have to include students. We've taken that away again, as I mentioned in last week's Zoom, unless you're comfortable interviewing students. So I gave you some options there, but again, you're going to want to get the types of data sets that are going to fit into what your research question is that you've come up with. So this is what you're going to do. It doesn't have to be outside of the data that you're going to put in an appendix. It doesn't have to be more than 1 page. Make the type of data the header. If you're doing surveys, just put surveys as your header. Then you start with explaining what you did. What was your goal of the data? As I told you, my goal was I wanted to find out what was working or not working in my social studies methods course for future courses. Who was involved in my case? My pedagogy students were involved for a couple of different years and 4 different terms. How long the process took. I mean, yours is going to be taking over the course of a day or two, or however many sessions you want to do. Mine took place over the course of multiple years. How you collected the data, I gave surveys, did an interview. In one of my cases, I analyze student lessons and in those student lessons, I should mention all my students had to turn in a unit to me, 5 to 7 lessons. So I would go through and analyze those, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then additionally, when some students said, well, maybe in that unit I didn't do this, but I did in some others, and that if they offered them to me, I looked at those as well. So you only have to analyze the interviews or one of the interviews. For the other 2 types of data sources, the ones you're doing this week, you don't have to worry about any analysis. All you're going to do is if you had to analyze the data, explain how you would do it. For example, what I might say, and I'm going to read off what I wrote here as I was writing this up. Um, for explaining the analysis of how I do the observation, I might say something like, I would read through my observation field notes multiple times and look for commonalities and themes, and then I would code those as I'm going through the field notes. For example, yellow would mean inquiry, green could mean using primary sources, etc. Something like that. That's what you're writing. You're just writing what you could see yourself doing. I'm not asking you to do the analysis until next week when you do one with the interview. Then you'll do a reflection section. What did you learn from doing this? What were the limitations of doing this? Well, limitations is you didn't have a lot of time, one, to do this. You didn't do the analysis, so you can only speculate. And then what are questions you have for me from doing this process? Um, and then I'll go through those, and if you have questions, I'll address those questions after in the write-up as well. Basically, what you're doing with this is just giving you an opportunity to practice doing a data set. I'm not asking for perfection. This is the first time you're doing this. You're just going to kind of play with it. You're kind of getting in the weeds here. Again, you're not analyzing at this point. You will analyze one of the interviews next week, so maybe I'll make another one of these, or we'll discuss that in the Zoom meeting next Thursday as I've looked at the data sets that have come in and we talk about those. But that's all you're doing right now. Um, you're just playing around with data sets. You're just learning the process of doing action research. So I hope that's helpful. If it's not, please feel free to send me an email. And if you want to set up a meeting for us to talk, we absolutely can do that.